Welcome back, everybody, to the Business Roundtable Podcast. I have a brand new guest this week, Madeline Miller, all the way down from down under in Australia. We're super excited to have her here. And we have a great topic we're going to be covering today, Madeline's focus, where she coaches and guides all sorts of individuals, particularly the millennials and Gen Zs. But we're going to get into her framework, her understanding, and really addressing the issues that I'm seeing as business owners. How do we incorporate this workforce in a positive way? And so, Madeline, I'm just super excited to have you here. Thanks for joining us on the Business Roundtable Podcast. I mean, you and I've met previously and had a lot of great conversations, and so I'm super excited to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here as well.
Yeah. Now, I love your story. You've written a book. You have a great website. You can check it out here, and we'll have all this in the show notes. But for those that are just kind of getting to know you, Madeline, and you came and you worked here in California and Los Angeles, and kind of like share a little bit about your journey. What got you started? Why are you so passionate about career coaching and guiding these folks? Like, just share a little bit about your history background.
Yeah, sure. So I started out, well, I didn't really start out, but I became a lawyer in my late 20s. And I always say I sort of went to law school almost because I was a bit out of options. And I thought, well, this will give me purpose, right? This will give me an identity. I remember saying, like, it's a body of knowledge I'll know, therefore I'll feel like purposeful. But that wasn't really the reality. And I ended up jumping, I think, in the first 5 years of being a lawyer. I moved like within law like 5 times. So I even moved to Cambodia. I worked for the UN. I was back in Melbourne, Australia. I worked for government. I worked for a private firm. So I really was still trying to find my path. And I think that was very eye-opening for me, because only later did I realize how much I was sort of projecting the problem onto the, I guess, environment, rather than realizing that, I was the problem, as in I hadn't really worked out what I wanted to do and why. So I was looking for an external solution to an internal problem. And I think when I did a little bit of this work, sort of values work, I got a little bit more aligned on my interests and skills. I decided that I really wanted to become an entertainment lawyer, because that kind of married, like skills, interests, vocation together. And from there, I could become more driven and more purposeful. So I sort of maneuvered myself into a role in that industry in Australia, but it's quite a small industry. As you said, I moved in 2015, I moved to the US, and I ended up working, I did a master's in entertainment law at UCLA, and then I ended up working in Hollywood, and that culminated as production attorney for the James Bond franchise. And I tell that part of the story because in like a movie, that would be the end, right? That'd be like, yeah,
Yes,
and she
sure.
made it, tick. But that was only really the start, or kind of, I guess it was the mid, because during that period, before I worked for Bond, I was working in another production company, and that was an incredibly intense work period for me. And that was the first time that I really think I got close to experiencing, burnout, the clinical expression of burnout. But it also was a real sort of moment of revelation for me, because I realized that I was becoming quite successful and I was achieving results, but I was not liking who I was in the process. And that was when I really looked around and thought, there's no one here to model myself on as a leader. I'm making this up as I go along, and I'm really just copying what I see around me and what seems to be accepted. But what is accepted isn't what I want to be. So that was sort of the start of me thinking more critically about leadership and, balancing ourselves out and work. And from then I got the James Bond job, and I was there, ended up being there for 6 years. I was back in the US, and I still am in the US. I mean, I still have my business in the US. But the sort of shift to me was when I had this great job and I'd sort of hit the peak of like what I wanted to do as an entertainment lawyer. And I didn't like to tell people, when I met them, I always say at parties, that I was a lawyer. Even though it was a cool job, it didn't feel like it reflected who I am or who I wanted to be. And so I realized, even though I had become more purposeful, I had become more successful, I had been developing myself as a better leader, I still wasn't truly living my purpose. I wasn't truly satisfied. I was successful and happy, but I wasn't really, really content. And I felt like I could do more. I felt like if I was really doing the thing I wanted to do, I would be more fulfilled and more content. And that's sort of what led me to coaching. It married a lot of my interests. Like I wanted to do more creative work. I love to communicate. I wanted to be of service to others. And like work and careers, I'd noticed after 20 odd years working globally, like I'd noticed how much of a significant role it plays in all of our lives because it's so tied to our identity. Our work identity is so much part of who we are and our ego, right? So it's
Absolutely.
sort of, it's a valuable thing to be interrogating. It doesn't just happen.
Yeah. So, I was going to say I read your ebook, by the way.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. And I was going through, and one of the notes I had in there was you made this statement. It says the deeper the career enmeshment, the greater risk of depression, burnout, anxiety when something shifts. And I think what you're getting at is like sometimes we just kind of drift into these things and then not really intentional. I mean, you were intentional, but I mean, it's like, oh, I should be doing this. And like you said, then you kind of looked up and you're like, I really am not really, yes, it gives me quote unquote success, maybe financially by the world standards, or maybe it seems glamorous or something like that. But is it really, like you said, living in your true purpose?
Yes.
And at the end of the day, and I'm glad you're recognizing this, at this point of your career, because there's some people that don't recognize this till much later on in life. And they look back and they're like, man, I'm not really that proud of or really happy with even where my life is now, right?
And I think, our innate values and purpose are probably always there, but the manifestation and what that looks like can change. So, I think of the career as a choose your own adventure. It's an evolution, right? It's not like one thing and that's it. So it's not like I want people hearing this to be like, oh my gosh, I'm not doing my thing and that's it. No, like it's more, I just encourage people to be more conscious about things, more intentional about things, because and that includes leadership, right? Going back to your initial point about the next generation at work, I think that I think when you are, let's say, living your purpose, for lack of a better way of putting it, right? Like when you are living your purpose, you are going to be showing up as a better leader, because I believe that it's such a reflection of who you are. It's so much more values driven, right? You are thinking consciously and intentionally about, how do I want to be showing the world, who I am in my responses, in my actions, in my behavior, like why does this trigger me so much? Oh, this sort of violates some of my values or boundaries or whatever. So you sort of inevitably become a more thoughtful leader, and a more thoughtful leader is a more positive leader. So that's why I think the purpose thing is so tied to leadership.
Absolutely. I mean, this is something that, I feel like when we connected, with my company, Steward Your Business is really leveraging the teams and the organization. It leverages on what you're doing, because if you're not clear on this and appreciating who you are and how you're showing up, and you try to be something else or somebody else, it's going to be harder to work with everybody, right? The team to be successful.
Absolutely. And also, like, you'll learn leadership principles or you'll go to a leadership training, but it's really hard to apply things if you don't really understand why. Like, how do I explain that better? Like, you've got to understand the sort of, it's all very well to be like, be positive, right? But like, if I'm not feeling positive today, how do I be positive? And like, it's about emotional regulation, and that comes from self-awareness, so there's all this work, this foundational work that's so important, because that's when you can really embody all of those leadership principles and sort of understand how to use them as tools, not just say something that you read in a textbook.
Yes, no, absolutely. And we're going to get into a little bit of, I really like your framework that we're going to get into a little bit about your AIR framework for modern leadership. Because I agree with you. It's like, say, once what's positive, quote unquote, for one person might be different than another person. And so you have to understand that. And so just saying these things without having, and that's what I love about having you, Madeline, as a career coach. It's one thing to read something in a book or watch a video. It's another thing to actually have something like help you actually implement this, incorporate this into your life, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everything helps. So even if you just read
it's
a book,
helpful. Just faster. You're gonna go faster, right?
But I mean, I always equated a bit to like a coach at the gym. Like, I know how to exercise. I've been moving my whole life. I technically know how to lift a weight, but I like having a coach or a trainer because they check my form, they motivate me to go harder, they, correct me, they tell me I'm going to do it today even if I don't want to do it. Like, that's what the trainer's for, right? It's not necessarily I don't know the stuff they're going to tell me, but they're going to make, they're going to course correct, they're going to guide me, they're going to let me see things differently, and they're going to motivate me, right? That's what a coach does.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you came up with this framework, which you call the air framework, and I'll let you explain it a little bit because I think it's a brilliant way of just helping people see things differently and coaching them along the way, and kind of to the problem that you're bringing up, living your purpose and having really impact. So, yeah, this is a lot, and I see a lot of people struggling with it. And I'm not just talking Gen Zs and millennials. I see older folks, mid-career, later career. They're like trying to figure out like what do I want to do with the next part of my life, the next journey in my life. So, if you wouldn't mind just kind of helping us unpack this framework that you've developed, and don't worry, at the end of this podcast, I'm going to provide links and all those things to get to Madeline's website and find these resources. But Madeline, would you mind just sharing us a little bit about that formula that you came up with?
Yeah, sure. So the formula, as you said, is AIR, and it stands for alignment, influence, and resilience. And I developed it because it's how I ended up approaching my own career, but it was also informed, like I said, through a couple of decades of global work where I observed a lot of people in different industries from different backgrounds doing different types of work. So it's not like one cookie cutter kind of person I was looking at. I wasn't just looking at lawyers, for example, right? I was looking at people in all ranges of industry from all nationalities. And I noticed that there were sort of similar like through lines in all of it. And look, everybody, and what I observed and believe is that everybody wanted to be doing work that felt meaningful to them.
Yes.
That's subjective, right? Like, again, so that's the sort of purpose part. Everybody wants to feel acknowledged for that work, right? That's the influence and impact part. And then everybody wants to feel that they're making the best decisions about either their future or within the workplace, right? And has the confidence in their decision-making ability. And that's the sort of resilience part. So that's how I kind of created it. So basically, we look at alignment, as I said before, as the foundation of everything. It's the foundation of how you are going to show up. It's the foundation of how you argue, how you approach a difficult conversation, the decisions you make, understanding if the decisions are really aligned with what you want, all of those things. So the alignment piece is really uncovering what really matters to you by aligning your values, your skills, and your interests. And that is then what gets you towards, really getting clearer on your purpose. Some people call it their mission, mission statement. That's what they say in branding, purpose or mission. Because that really helps you define your purpose, but therefore it helps you set meaningful goals. So I use that example of me deciding to become an entertainment lawyer and, driving my way there. And that was a goal, and it wasn't a bad goal, but it wasn't actually at the end of the day the most meaningful, relevant goal to me as a human. It was just, so I sort of had done the first bit of alignment, but as I evolved in my career as a human, I got deeper, and that's when I ended up becoming a coach/entrepreneur. So that's the alignment piece, and that's all that work we do together to find that alignment really helps you create a strong personal brand. And personal branding is probably a new word, and I'm sure there's lots of people that don't like it, and I get it. But like, I really see a personal brand as like the extension of yourself, like your authentic self. And that personal brand is then what you take into the world, and it's your unique presence, right? Like
absolutely.
And I talk about your personal brand as how you influence. And, in my workshops and seminars, I talk a lot about how the origins of the word influence actually come from a Latin root meaning to flow in, and actually referred to a celestial fluid flowing in from the stars into humans to affect their destiny. Very profound. But I was like, that's interesting. Its origins actually mean like, into humans to affect their destiny, like it's an extension of self. So when you're influencing people, you're presenting your true, authentic self and all your authentic and skills. It's not about manipulating or persuading people that you're something you're not. So that is why the alignment piece is so important in order to get more influence, right? So from there you can influence it. And then of course there's skills building stuff. You can learn about like the psychology of persuasion and certain like rhetoric skills and communication skills. That's huge. I look a lot at the communications matrix, like assertive communication, passive aggressive, but even understanding assertive communication. At the root of assertive communication is the belief that your rights, interests, and needs are valuable. If you don't have the strong alignment, sometimes you don't know what your rights, interests, and needs are. Right. So all of this stuff feeds into each other. So that's why I say alignment. And then that's how you can generally start to influence. And from influence, obviously, you can have greater impact. And then along the way, you're showing up differently. You're managing difficult conversations better. You're understanding what triggers you. You're hopefully self-advocating more. All of these things that you do and you repeat, that's what starts to build resilience, right? You start to sort of be able to take bigger risks, be able to understand that you're going to have self-doubt, but believe that you can do it anyway. So that's how you sort of strengthen those muscles of like resilience. And that's sort of how it's put together. Yeah.
You went through it quickly, but there's a lot of great information in there and the way to think about it. I really like, and like each stage or each, it's a foundation, like, right. Each one builds on each other. So you can't build resilience without the influence, and that comes from the alignment. And getting, and I don't know about you, Madeline, but for me, this alignment is a refinement process. It's like getting clear in over time, really appreciating my values, and so that really helps guide me. And I found people, just to your point about the influence, like if you're aligned, if you're not clear about what your alignment is, and you're trying to influence people showing up inauthentically, you're not really going to have that great of influence. You're not going to have that great of impact, because it's coming, like you said, on this foundation of it's rocky, shaky of alignment and your values and how you're showing up, and definitely resilience. You're going to probably crumble under pressure, right? Because you're just like, oh man, this is hard to do.
Yeah. And I think that sort of makes a really important point. Like when you and I are talking about influence, we're not talking about success or power, because you can have power without real influence. I mean, look at our leaders today. They're powerful, but I wouldn't say it comes from a strong place of alignment or even, self-acceptance, right? So the sort of influence I'm talking about, and I know you are as well, is that extension of that solid sense of self, right? That self-belief that you have something of value, that you are powerful, and that what you have of value is important and good for the world, whatever it might be. It doesn't have to be saving the planet. It can be anything. But, to really believe that in yourself, that is the greatest source of power we can have. And that is also what I think, because when I'm talking about resilience, I'm talking about healthy emotional resilience, not just grit and pain. There is a little bit of grit and there is a little bit of pain that goes into developing resilience, but it's the kind of, again, it's a beautiful place of self-acceptance where you're like, I love this one where you're like, I'm scared and there are risks in doing this, but I'm going to do it anyway. To me, that's true resilience.
Yeah. In your book, you have some great case studies. I'm trying to go back to my notes, like with Jasmine and Alex and Maria. There's some other new ones in there. But talk about, like, what are you seeing right now in particularly in Gen Zs or millennials that are coming into the workforce? You're seeing them and that their mindsets or limitations that they're struggling with, and kind of speak to that and where you've guided them.
So a lot of I have a big following through social media. So I interact with a lot of younger people that way, and I've had obviously Gen Z and millennial clients. So I have this sort of anecdotal stories to tell, I guess, but also there's a lot of studies out there. Every year McKinsey, Deloitte do a sort of like state of the union on like where we are in the workforce. So a lot of this is backed up by the data as well, right? The surveys,
absolutely.
So I think, to set the scene, I think it's important to note that Gen Z in particular, because millennials are fairly, millennials can be like 40 plus now. Like, so when I say millennials, Gen Z millennials, I'm thinking about like slightly younger millennials, maybe like 25-year-olds, 35-year-olds. So the Gen Z really entered the workforce in a very unique time because they possibly finished, or they probably finished their schooling online. They possibly completed part of their college online, and they possibly started work remotely, right? Like now maybe they had a bit, they've done some portion of that remotely, which is unique. Like
Yes,
remote work
absolutely.
was not, you had offshore people, but remote work was not a thing when I was coming up, not
Yeah.
even really that much before the pandemic, right? So
Right. Yeah.
that alone, and then schooling online, college online. I mean, they are very formative years, and to have had those sort of years transformed in that way, I think can be quite impacting. And I think that they therefore have had a lot of anxiety and also are sort of not the same opportunities to develop a lot of those interpersonal skills that we all needed to develop pretty quickly at work. And so I
Yes.
think that there's a sort of like confluence of like what Gen Z are coming in with and then what the workplaces are experiencing of Gen Zs. So I think from the workplace perspective, there's this sense that Gen Z aren't necessarily work ready. They lack professionalism. They definitely, I mean, there's a sort of cliche, but they just don't like to pick up the phone and call someone, so like for sales jobs or client jobs, like there's some problems, right?
Yes.
And I think that that's probably true for the reasons I said. I don't say that to demonize young people. I think that's probably very true. I think where it gets a bit complicated is that there's this sense that they don't want to work as hard, and that they are entitled or have grand expectations for how fast they should move up. And I think that, again, we're talking in generalizations here.
Yeah.
I think that they are coming with different expectations about what work should be, right? And I think those expectations can be very challenging, particularly if they're not like great at professional skills and then they want to move up quickly. Like there's a real kind of like, but that's almost like an educational role that workplaces have to fill to manage expectations. Whereas in the past, I don't think they did so much because there wasn't such a gap in expectations. So I think that workplaces are having to treat Gen Zs differently because of their unique entrance to the workforce. And I think that's where the tension lies. It's very easy to just say, oh, they're just this and I hate hiring them, right? It's like, well, there may be a few of those things actually. And some of the things they're asking for may not be that bad. Some of those things might be not quite possible. But you are going to have to work a little bit harder to integrate them into the workforce.
Yeah, I think I think it's important for business owners to hear this. Why we have the Business Roundtable podcast is because we want to be able to reach business owners and not just individuals, but business owners here like you, Madeline, say, look, I can work with your organization or work with your individuals, but also, as you and I both have talked about, collaborating and finding a space to help, because this is really important. It's both the business owner, like what I hear you saying, the company's responsibility, and the employee, the individual coming in, is both, right? It's not one or the other.
Dual track. And I think, everybody that starts work, every generation starts work not knowing stuff, right? So there's the usual things that people need to skill up into there. But I think that there is a greater skills deficit with this generation. I do. I think they feel it too. And they do have some different expectations of what work is. Like the job for life thing has gone out the window, right?
Yes.
The work-life balance, whatever that means, like the hours, what they believe should be like the work way is different. And sometimes I really encourage, like if I'm working with companies on sort of intergenerational leadership, I really encourage them to just stop rather than reacting and go, okay, is what they're asking for so different from what I would have liked myself when I started working? Because they are going to challenge the status quo of work, but they are also going to be, when I say they, Gen Z and Millennials, are going to be 70% of the workforce by 2030. So you could say, oh, well, it's like, okay, but they're going to be the dominant piece of work, right? So some of the things they're challenging, I think we're going to have to really keep an open mind to around like work-life balance, hours on, blah, 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 blah. Other things that, equally alarming is like they are going to be 70% of the workforce and they need to be skilled up. For the
Yes.
longevity and succession of companies, we need them to be good people, right? Like they need to have good
Absolutely.
leadership. And that's where I really think like what you and I do in terms of like getting that leadership development training going is very important because they are behind in certain ways. And
Yeah, no,
technology
I see
has
that.
not helped, right? Technology has not helped our interpersonal. It's made us connected, but it hasn't helped our other interpersonal skills.
No, I agree. We're more quote unquote connected, like you said, but actually being able to communicate effectively, is not there. I literally just got, like I was telling you right before we started recording this podcast, I was doing another episode with two business owners, and they would actually even say, you know, come talk to me, interact with me, the business owners, but the others for their own stories wouldn't do that. And they would just have stories of, well, they're the business owner, they're too busy, they don't really care about me, and then nobody's talking, and
Yeah.
it's like, right? And so now
Yeah.
everybody goes to their corner, and that's not helpful.
No,
Um,
and if
it
they're online, they just shut down their laptop and it's
Mhm.
done. Like, you don't even have to see people, right? So
Yes,
you've got to make
right.
more of an effort to I mean, some people don't ever see in real life the people they work with. Like,
Yeah.
how do you create collaborative teams when you're remote? That's a big problem.
It's a really big problem, and there's not a one size fits all. Like the one business owner I was talking to, she meets with her team in person once a month. Okay, because they're not all in an office or whatever that looks like. Whatever, it's different for every company, but you've got to be intentional, not accidental, right? In the way that you're doing this, and I think oftentimes business owners, particularly, or even maybe if you're leading a team, you're getting overwhelmed, and that's why I like having somebody like you on Madeline, because you can come in and say, look, I can help you and take some of the lift off of you. I can't take all of it away, but I can certainly help you and your team. And I think that's why it's so important to think and look outside of your own kind of understanding and consider, just as you are a Gen Z or millennial, like, oh well, this is just what my friends say with me. Well, think and look beyond yourself, bring in other people to help you along the journey and give you a different perspective and equip
Yeah.
you. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And there's a dual sort of, I guess, outcome that
Mhm.
if you do invest in that kind of, what works quite well with Gen Zs is group stuff, right? They,
Mhm.
they kind of like to be connected in that way. So you can do really
Mhm.
effective group coaching.
Mhm.
And you can teach some really practical things, right? Like you can
Yeah,
teach like
absolutely.
conflict resolution. You can teach like sounds so silly, but how to like pick up a phone and talk to people. Not like how to pick up a phone, but like how to start off conversations. You
Yeah.
can teach what was the thing I was going to say that was super important that they struggle with? Oh, I can't remember anyway. But there's a lot of things that you can do in that sort of group coaching environment. But the benefit to companies is not only that you are getting more proactive, engaged professional staff. They like that cohort, particularly the Gen Zs, always say in all of the studies and surveys that they want to feel that somebody is invested in their career development. They don't feel that
Mhm.
they have that investment. So if you give them these learning opportunities for skills that, like you said, are kind of their responsibility,
Yeah.
they not only do they thrive, they also feel valued, right? Like, oh,
Mhm.
I'm getting, people care about my development as a leader. Like they care about my career development. And that's great for organizations. I mean, that's great
Oh,
for
yeah.
retention, that's great for engagement, productivity, all of those things. So
Absolutely, yeah, when you're intentional about these things, I kinda look at 5 key areas. You're talking about how we communicate with each other, how what are our relationships look like? What's the trust that we have with each other, right? And that all contributes to the ability, for, how we execute and increase our capacity to take on, more things, so these are just some of the areas I look at, and I think the business owners, at least the ones I work with and talk with are, you know, or some of the ones they realize when they hire somebody like yourself or myself, it's an investment because they know that there's a real cost of losing people and all the time it takes to train them to get them up
yeah,
to speed, right? If the long every day, every week, every month that they keep them longer and engaged, the better the company will grow. Everybody wins together. But if they're not doing that, that intentional, it can be very costly,
yeah,
very, very
yeah, for
costly.
sure. I mean, there's some
Mhm.
articles out there that say certain companies are not hiring people under 27. Um, But I don't know if that's really a sustainable hiring practice given, if you do like first of all, you need labor. But
Yep.
secondly, like if you're not hiring them, you're also missing out on the things they bring. So I think that,
Mhm.
because technology is changing so rapidly, obviously AI, we can't ever do a
Mhm.
podcast without mentioning AI, right? Um,
Mhm.
you need a young workforce to be
Yeah.
nimble, you really do. So, you can't just exclude them from the workforce, unfortunately.
No. I mean, and like you mentioned earlier, okay, even if they're not gonna spend their lifelong career at your company, okay, no, honestly, the life cycle of many companies is not that it's not decades,
Right,
it's accepting that
right.
companies that been around for decades, right? But are they with you the journey of the company, 5, 10, 15 years? I mean, possibly, and if you can keep them and have them involved, and I think some of the companies that have actually been successful longer, they have people that were like literally from the ground up. They became in very entry level, right? And they moved their way up the company because they understood they aligned themselves in a good way. Obviously, it was a good fit and became a high level leader, maybe even the president or CEO at some point. And they started off at a very low level thing. So as if you're clear on this and you can find alignment, like you said, with numbers on your values and then find that with the company and you guys can weave that together, it's a win-win,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, and I mean, I don't think that every Gen Z wants to be jumping companies year to year. It's just that they're
Mhm.
they're more likely to do it if they're unhappy.
Well, and I think companies, like to your point, just as we're saying the individual needs to be looking at this, I would say you apply that same, air model to the company itself. Is the
Mm,
company clear on its alignment,
mm,
right?
mm.
And what it's trying to influence, because we see companies that don't, if they're if that's off, right? Their
Yeah,
messaging doesn't like you said, you can be in places of power for different reasons, and people can take a power by aggression and other things, but it's not sustainable over. I don't see it sustainable.
yeah.
Something will break, right?
The sustainability, and that's, I mean, I should have mentioned that, but exactly,
Mhm.
the whole AIR framework is about sustainable success.
Mhm.
Because again, I was successful, but to me, it wasn't sustainable. Well, at one point, it
Mhm.
wasn't sustainable because I was gonna burn out. Then I
Yep.
sort of worked through all of that and, did that kind of work, became a better leader, became more thoughtful, understood more about how to manage people and work with people. But then it wasn't sustainable because it didn't feel really aligned. So,
Mhm.
and I think, and it's actually really interesting. I was reading something in Forbes the other day. There's a study that's been done on what they're calling misalignment burnout. So you may not be burnt out at work for the normal reasons we think of, but when you don't feel you have that purpose and it doesn't feel aligned, you can feel burnt out over a long period of time, because having a sense of purpose is so important for cognitive and mental health. I mean, they literally work with Alzheimer's patients on purpose, right?
Mhm.
Like, so misalignment burnout is a growing cause of burnout, but it's a silent cause, right? Because it
Mhm.
doesn't necessarily present itself in the same ways as other forms
Yes.
of burnout.
No, that's actually a great observation, Madeline. I 100% agree with what I've gone and talked with my old alma mater college, and I hear people going and getting a technical skill because, like you said, well, I guess that's what I should be. I should be a scientist. I should be a doctor. Or I should be a lawyer. That's what my parents said, or I should be. That's what my culture kind of embraces. I guess that's what I should be. And they go and they spend all this money and they spend all this time, and then they're not clear truly on what, like you said, their purpose. A great book I read years ago was Start With Why by Simon Sinek, where this idea of what is your why? And it's hard, in my experience, Madeline, to articulate that. Just like if I just asked you cold and you never spent any time work doing this, it's very difficult the way our brains work to actually articulate that. It takes real work with somebody like yourself, Madeline, to help get, refine this kind of rough idea or thought and like get it clear, more pointed and present. And once you can do that, you can cut through the other opportunities. So if there's something that says like, legally, like I work with lawyers a lot, Madeline, I really appreciate them. I don't want to be a lawyer. I know I'm not a lawyer. I'm not looking at every little word and every nuance and like, that just drives me crazy. But I know the value of it. It's very important, right? And so, then we can use that as a filter for the opportunities and things before us. You're like, that would be great for you, but not for me, right?
Yeah, and I think also, like, I don't want people listening to think that, oh, having a sense of purpose means you're going to quit your job. It's
Yeah.
having a sense of purpose is finding purpose in the work you do. Like and that's the
Yes.
company thing. Like it needs to feel tied to something meaningful that the company's doing. Something that's rewarded, or when successes are won, there's like acknowledgement of that. Like that's sort of the second observation I made. Everyone wants to feel acknowledged for the work they do. Like purpose can be small. Not
Yeah.
everybody's out there with this big, like dramatic sense of my purpose. And purpose is
Uh-huh.
like some people are like, I want to turn up. I want to, feel like I'm acknowledged for these tasks, and I like doing these technical tasks, and I want to
Mhm.
work with people and have a good team rapport, and I want to feel so. That is enough, right? Like so, I
Mhm.
think
Mhm.
it's not purpose can kind of get conflated with passion, or like, and
Mhm.
sometimes they're aligned. And sorry, I keep using the word aligned. Sometimes they're like entwined, but
Yeah.
it doesn't need to be this big dramatic thing. It can just be, I need to feel like my my life has meaning.
Mhm.
I need to
Yeah.
feel like I have meaning through work. And one other thing I was going to say, based on what you were saying there, is like, if you kind of think about your purpose early on in your career, because you might not know exactly what you can do when you're like
Mhm.
21,
Mhm.
22. Still,
Yep.
doing that work is really valuable because it puts you in the driver's seat. I think I talk about that
Mhm.
a bit in my book. Like
Yeah.
when you're in the driver's seat, you are making better decisions, informed decisions, and you're able to sort of set meaningful goals. So you're just like, your path to get there is sort of yours, and you kind of know why you're doing it. And that helps you, I think, deal with some of the mundane aspects of work, right? Like sometimes
Mhm.
I even now, I love what I do. There's boring bits to what I do. There's bits
Yeah.
that I avoid. There's bits that are draining. I'm
Yeah.
not like filled with joy every single moment of my day, but I'm filled with contentedness, right?
Yes.
So,
Mhm.
and particularly early in your career, I think that you are going to have to go through some roles which aren't the end goal, but they're and so if you understand how they're on your path, to get you there, it makes those earlier years or those less satisfying jobs more fulfilling, right? Because you
Mhm.
kind of,
Mhm.
yeah, which I think is what I think that's important for Gen Z and millennials to hear. It's
Mm.
it's expectation setting, right? Like
Mhm.
this every day is not going to be the best day of your life, and you have to get through some of the boring stuff to
Mhm.
get where you want to go. But if you've done that purpose work, if you've found that alignment, it's all going to be more meaningful for you, and that helps you through the hard stuff.
Yeah, I agree. There's always, I say, kind of getting to where you're in the majority of the time, like you said, you're living in that space of kind of your genius. But there's other things we all have to do. As business owners, there's things that just doesn't get me super excited. But I have to do them. But it's like if I can either, if I have to do them, learning like, okay, how to do that as quickly as I can or get it done and then move into my main, I call, your area of genius or expertise, or where you are best suited, appreciating that. Or bring other people into your team and understand that. I think that's, again, understanding, like you said earlier, your alignment and appreciating yourself, recognizing like, where, um, you know, I don't have to be all the things. Sometimes I think everybody feels like they have to know all of these things
Yeah.
and do all of them, right? Well, and I know a
Yep.
lot of entrepreneurs actually think they have to know every aspect of the business, and it's like,
Yeah.
well, no, we're not experts on that. Maybe you shouldn't be doing HR and hiring if your strength is really doing the presenting or visioning or whatever that might be. That's the main part where you should be. Get out of the minutia of that and let somebody else do that if that's really their alignment, that's what their passion is, right?
Yeah. 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 I mean, unfortunately, when you're like a solopreneur, you
Mhm.
have to become an expert at everything.
Yeah, and yeah, yep.
But it helps you work out, okay, I'm not gonna beat myself up that I'm not good at this, right? Like,
Mhm,
I'm just gonna learn what I need and then get to the point where I can, like I said, delegate it to someone that's better than me, and that's fine, right?
mhm.
Because I am the prize. I know what I'm heading towards, and I know what my skills are.
Yeah, absolutely. I think said this in the book or something like this, like about, when we're redefining success or what a success looks like, it's not lowering standards,
No.
it's getting clarity, right? It's getting what is really meaningful. And I think, the reason I loved having you on the podcast here as we're getting close to the end of the podcast is Madeline, I think that there's so much synergy. You and I talked about, like, there's so much need out there right now, whether you're on the business end of it, or whether you're the individual listening to this and you're like, man, how do I figure out navigate my way through this? Number one, you're not alone. A lot of people are dealing with this, right? And number two, the reason why we do this podcast every week is that we can provide resources and point you in the right direction, and connect you with somebody like Madeline. And so, Madeline, as we're wrapping up, what would you just say, like, what are the, kind of key nuggets or takeaways that you want others to hear as we're, in your journey as coaching and guiding these millennials, guiding these Gen Zs in their careers?
So like, what's the key takeaway for possibly
For them,
Gen
what
Z
should they? I
millennial?
mean, you've talked about the air. You've talked about, if it's like, if it could take one thing away from this, and like, you're stuck, you're feeling like you're not living, is it your purpose, or you're just, what is it that to move them in the right direction? What would you say, where to take a step today, in the right
Yeah.
direction?
So okay. I'd say two things. I'd say,
Yeah.
first of all, in terms of the mindset, I want to tell them
Mhm.
it's not your fault, because I felt very like, oh, everyone else knows except me, right?
Yep.
Like, oh, I'm a failure because I haven't. Da, da. And I think it's not your fault because
Mm.
nobody teaches us this stuff at school, right? At
Mhm.
school, you get taught what you get taught, and
Yep.
you think about vocations and stuff, but nobody
Yes.
teaches you sort of the more holistic approach to your career and it being your journey, right? So I think, first of
Mhm.
all, like, cut yourself some slack. It's okay that you feel this way. It's normal. And then the second thing I would say is that the the perspective to always come back to is that there are things you can control and things you can't control. So I
Mhm.
always encourage people to focus on what they can control, and what they can
Yes.
control, their inputs and their outputs. And that's why it's very important to do some of this work early on. So, if there's one thing I would encourage, particularly that cohort, to do like today, it's some of this alignment work, right? Like, what are your professional, and I have exercises on this, like, what are your
Oh, yeah.
professional values? What are your, like, what's the career vision? Like, what gets the most out of you in the workplace? What doesn't, all of these pieces that you pull together to develop your personal brand. I've actually got this exercise to craft your own mission and purpose statement, and like the steps sort of you can go through to get there. So doing that alignment piece is the most important thing to do.
A foundation, like we talked about. Yeah.
Build
Getting
the
that.
right foundation.
Absolutely. I mean, Madeline, it is a true pleasure having you on here. I know Madeline and I are talking about some future activities and events that we can participate in. And if you're interested, you guys want to hear more, please like and subscribe to the podcast here. We love your comments. Madeline and I will definitely respond to them. I'm going to put all of the show notes together so you can get on Madeline's website, get to all the resources. She has just a tremendous amount of resources on her website, videos, ebook, you name it. It's awesome, Madeline. It is a real pleasure having you here on the Business Roundtable. Thank you for taking time out and sharing your wisdom and encouragement.
Thank you so much. That was really fun.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Thanks so much. Listen in next time. Appreciate you guys joining us.
Bye.
Bye.